Coming up, we're talking money. How do you save, budget, and use credit? We'll talk with some experts to get advice for your family. Plus, we'll hear more about a federal court's decision that upholds healthcare as a treaty right for American Indians. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian Country Today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is making more than $171 million available for Native communities. The grants are meant to carry out affordable housing activities for the benefit of low-income Native American families. The funds may be used to develop, maintain, and operate affordable housing in safe and healthy environments on tribal lands. In January 2017, a study found that tribal households are worse off than other U.S. households. Due to the pandemic, the applications will be opened longer to allow people more time to apply. Native American leaders in South Dakota are keeping a close eye on redistricting. Voting rights advocates are concerned the state's largest minority group may be excluded from the ongoing process. At stake are opportunities for Natives to represent their communities or have influence in the state. Redrawing district boundaries is a critical part of determining representation within the state legislature. For years, Native Americans have been underrepresented in state lawmaking. According to the U.S. Census, 11% of South Dakota identifies as Native Americans, but only make up 4% of the 2020 legislature. This year, the redistricting process, which happens once every decade, is about 5 months shorter than in previous years. A new Colorado law granting Native Americans in-state college tuition is already attracting students. Nearly 200 Native American students are at state colleges and universities there and should expect to see their annual tuition slashed by about $15,000 this year. The new law provides in-state status to members of 48 tribes with historical ties to Colorado. Its goal is to increase the number of American Indian students who attend and become successful at college. And one of those students is Northern Arapaho citizen and incoming freshman, Jenna Whiteplume.
I was just super excited because I knew that it would provide a lot more opportunities for not just me, but other Native kids who wanted to get out of Wyoming or just anywhere and be able to branch out and go where they want to go, instead of just having to settle on the cheapest option or anything.
The number of students immediately impacted is small, but education officials say its importance is in the strides it makes towards ensuring equity and enhancing diversity. A new Arizona law is protecting Native American students who want to wear traditional regalia during their graduation ceremonies. It was signed yesterday by Governor Doug Ducey, and the law prevents dress code policies that interfere with students wearing things with cultural significance. And this includes full clothing items, as well as eagle feathers or eagle plumes. Governor Stephen Lewis from the Gila River Indian community was at the ceremony. He says Native students should be able to wear regalia at graduation with pride. At the signing, the governor spoke about the importance of this new law.
I think it's important that all of our tribal nations and communities have the right to represent their culture, and that's what this bill is about. When young people or anyone in these communities have some of the biggest and proudest moments of their life, they should be able to wear items that represent their traditional culture and belief.
Though Governor Doug Ducey signed the bill into law in April, the ceremonial signing was not scheduled until after the lawmaking session ended. The Ute Mountain Utes Charter School in Colorado is officially on its way to shaping the futures of young tribal citizens. On Monday, the school opened its doors to 23 kindergarten and first grade students. The community academy will be a place for children to embrace their culture alongside STEM and other curriculum. Classes are being held in a temporary building until the new building is completed later this month. School officials are hoping to offer additional instruction by adding 2nd through 4th grade classes next year. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals rules that health care is a treaty right guaranteed to tribal nations who signed the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. The Rosebud Sioux tribe sued the U.S. government after the Indian Health Service shut down a hospital that served tribal citizens. That caused hardship for anyone seeking medical treatment. Although a number of treaties call for provisions of medical services for tribes and federally funded health care for Native people, all appropriations are made by Congress. To read more about this story, visit our website, indiancountrytoday.com, and search for the headline, Federal Court Affirms Health Care as Treaty Right. And those are the headlines for Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Coming up, a discussion on finances for your family. And later, the Treaty of Fort Laramie's role in guaranteeing medical care as a treaty right for American Indians. We'll be right back. Many families need help when it comes to understanding credit scores, budgeting, and overall financial management. They may have questions on how to build assets or determine which bank account is the right fit. And some natives don't even have bank accounts, mostly due to living in remote areas. Joining us today are two people from the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition, also known as ONAC. It's a national nonprofit organization dedicated to working with tribes to help create opportunities for economic self-sufficiency for tribal citizens. Christy Feinsell is the executive director of ONAC. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you. Happy to join.
Yes, and also joining us today is Felicia Freeman, and she is a financial coach with ONAC. Welcome, Felicia.
Thank you, Patty.
Christy, let's start with you. When ONAC was created in Oklahoma, it branched out to serve Native people living across the country here. Your clients come from federally or state recognized tribes. Give us some ideas of what services that you offer them.
Yes, thank you. So the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition is a direct service provider. That's kind of one of the hats we wear. And so we provide seed funding for children's savings accounts, emergency savings accounts, during the pandemic, emergency cash assistance, down payment assistance, and also incentives to help individuals open a bank account. And then we also are an intermediary grant funder. So we support other Native nonprofits and tribes to be able to implement their own asset building programs. We provide national research on Native asset building and also resource guides. And then we also coordinate the National Native Earned Income Tax Credit and Voluntary Income Tax Assistance Network, as well as the National Native Get Banked campaign. So trying to work with tribal citizens to connect to safe and affordable bank accounts.
Well, we'll get to bank accounts in a little bit here, but when you talk about culturally relevant financial education, what does that mean?
So when we're working with tribal citizens, we are kind of talking about assets in a broader way. So we don't just think about money as the only asset or the score on your credit report, but also thinking about assets very broadly. So it's kinship, sovereignty, tribal food security, our native arts and languages, and then thinking about community held assets as well. So in the financial education classes and in the financial coaching, we try to make sure that we acknowledge all these understandings and values that are held by those we're serving and to incorporate all that in.
Okay, thank you for that. And Felicia, one of the things, when you're talking about building a budget, along with that comes looking at your credit report. What are some of the questions Native people have about their credit report? Can they read it? Do they understand it?
No, typically most people in general don't really know the algorithm that makes up the credit score. So we do share the FICO credit matrix and talk about the TransUnion algorithm and how the others are generally the same, just a little bit less of a percentage on each category. But most people really don't know what makes up their credit score. And that, I didn't know. I'm going to be honest with you. I started with the Citizen Potawatomi Community Development 15 years ago, and I didn't have bad credit. I just didn't have a score because I didn't use Main Street banking. I had a vehicle that was reliable. Of course, it was paid for, so it was a $5,000 vehicle. So we're not taught these things in school. So most people don't know it.
And so how is the right way to use credit? How do you counsel people?
To build an asset, use the credit to purchase a reliable vehicle, use the credit to purchase a home that's going to increase in value over time, or to even start a business of their own so they don't have to work for the other guy.
And what about paying bills on a credit card and then paying that credit card off every single month? Is that part of the equation? Is that helpful?
Yeah, it really is. I typically don't suggest a credit card for a client unless we've done a complete budget session and I know that they can afford to do it, and I know that their behavior towards credit and using it is, like you said, based on acquiring an asset and only using it as a tool to build their credit score.
I think one thing people may not quite understand too is that if you don't use credit, that can also ding your credit score. Do you want to explain a little bit how that works?
Sure. For those that are ready for a secured credit card or a mainstream credit card, I suggest that they use it for gas and groceries, things that they already have in their budget. And then I'd go one step further and say, go ahead and deduct that from your check register or your debit card log so that it looks like you've taken the money from your savings or your checking account to pay for those things. And then at the end of the month, when the bill comes before the interest is due, just write the check and pay them all off.
All right.
Because you do have to use it to gain that credit from it.
And to keep that credit score consistent with consistent use of credit. So it's really interesting. Let's come back to the idea of banking. And Christy, you talked about people who are banked or unbanked. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So according to FDIC data, 50.5% of American Indians and Alaska Natives are unbanked or underbanked. So by unbanked, they wouldn't have any checking or savings account. And by kind of underbanked, maybe they have some kind of like a card or prepaid card, where they can put some money on it, but there are high fees associated with using that. And so, or maybe they, go to a payday lender to get some services and also are paying higher fees. If they were just able to deposit the check they've received, for example, for emergency cash assistance into a savings account, they wouldn't be incurring a fee for that deposit.
So really being able to talk to people about what kind of bank account works for you. And then what are the challenges when people live in remote areas?
So, for example, during this pandemic, we've been distributing emergency cash assistance across the country by region. And so when individuals do not have a bank account and maybe they're in a very rural area, especially during the pandemic, it's been challenging, right? Because we want to try to get the cash assistance to them. And so some of them have to drive a ways to try to deposit the check. If they do have a savings or checking account, then they can accept an ACH transfer. And so we were making transfers that way. But, some tribal citizens can be, 4 times away than the kind of typical length or distance from an ATM. If there's maybe no financial institution nearby, but there's a market that will cash a check, they can only handle so many checks during a short period of time if we were going to, try to deliver 100 into a certain community. So, we've been trying to figure out ways to make it work, given the situation that some are unbanked or underbanked.
Let's talk about starting young and the children's savings accounts.
So the children's savings accounts were developed with this idea that how do we create a situation where youth feel like going to trade school or college is really an option for them. So ONAC provides a $100 opening account deposit. The parents are the account owners, and we've been funding them through 529 college savings plans. So the money can grow more quickly than if it was held in a savings account because the money's invested in stocks and bonds. And so we provide the opening account deposit, work with the families to get the account open, manage the account, and then they can add additional deposits from there, maybe at birthdays or Christmas, if they happen to have any available funds at that time. So really we want youth to kind of switch the dynamic to think that it really is an option. And so that's the intent behind the program.
And then how do you get the kids engaged to understand that they're saving for their future? Again, whether it's going to be college or a trade school.
Sure. So pre-pandemic, we used to hold in-person account opening events where, we'd have a tribal partner that would invite us in. We'd go and we would give the children piggy banks, and we would have a local Native artist that was invited by the community to come in and talk about traditional arts. The youth would be able to draw pictures of assets that matter them. I think we sent some over to you perhaps for display afterwards. And so, being able to have this conversation, we also provided a Native specific financial education booklet that talks about this broad understanding of assets again, and, asking us to kind of think about what values we hold in our communities and in our families. And then, say college really is an option for you. We work with one tribal leader who said until he was a senior, I believe in high school, no one had ever said that college was an option. And finally, somebody did come in and say it, and it just shifted his whole trajectory. And now he's been in leadership for like over 30 years. And so really what we want to do is try to build up the next set of Native leaders, and we want them to feel like this is an option. So even if they are of lower income right now, just starting small and putting some money in and then trying to connect in with other scholarships, we think hopefully people can cobble together enough to be able to go.
Felicia, what's your last takeaway for people listening to this conversation and watching?
I think most importantly, the concepts of conserving our resources is nothing new to our Native people. Our ancestors have planned, they've saved, and they've reserved their resources for the different seasons of their life, spring, summer, fall, and winter. So I start off the counseling session by reminding each one of our participants that what they're learning is nothing new. It's just a different strategy.
So shifting that thought there. Well, ladies, thank you so much. And we'll have a link to your website when we post this to our website as well. So Christy Finsel, thank you so much. And Felicia Freeman, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back, we are going to be joined with Mary Annette Pember to talk a little bit about healthcare as a treaty right. We'll be right back. When the U.S. government signs treaties with other nations, it's expected to uphold the terms of those treaties. In the 1800s, the federal government signed many treaties with tribal nations, and yet has not fulfilled the terms of those treaties. In 1868, the Treaty of Fort Laramie was signed between the U.S. and several tribal nations in the Great Plains, and it specified health care. However, the government did not fulfill that treaty obligation. Mary Annette Pember joins us now to talk about the case that brought it to court. Welcome, Mary Annette.
Hi, Patty. Good to be here.
So is healthcare a treaty right for Native Americans?
Yeah, that's like a really good question. Often in treaties, there will be some sort of a mention of a provision for healthcare, but it may not be construed to actually be a treaty right. Subsequent legislation like the Snyder Act of 1921 and the permanent reauthorization of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, they created they were an expression of the United States trust obligation with Native people. But these various treaty rights have not really been affirmed in court as guaranteeing healthcare. This particular case was argued in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. It was an appeal emerging from a decision in 2016 in a case brought, a lawsuit brought by the Rosebud Sioux tribe about the Indian Health Service decision to close emergency rooms in their area, and it had a pretty devastating impact on them. People had to travel a great deal, like 50 miles or more, to get emergency services. So they filed this lawsuit claiming that healthcare was actually guaranteed in the Treaty of Fort Laramie. And the US government at the time in 2020, actually during Donald Trump's administration, they appealed. And the attorneys were rather surprised to see that then subsequently, after President Joe Biden was elected, that his administration also supported this appeal. But the Eighth Circuit found that, in fact, healthcare was guaranteed under this treaty. So that's pretty significant.
And that ruling just came out in late August here. So when we look at those treaties, and when you look at that time frame in the 1800s, trying to get Native Americans to assimilate in so many ways, and that included medicine. What happened to traditional medicines when this healthcare for Western medicine was supposed to be provided?
Yes, if you get down into the weeds of the treaty, there is mention that the Native folks were encouraged to abandon use of their traditional medicines and to embrace Western medicine. And the treaty does allow for provision of one, quote unquote, competent physician to be provided for tribal members. So that has been subsequently then construed to mean a treaty right. So, as I was speaking to people about this decision, Geraldine LeBeau, a church, who's a citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and she's also the CEO of the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board. She noted that this is like a recipe for failure and a recipe for, creating the health disparities that we see in Indian country today.
And again, when you think about how just one physician to serve so many people, when again, so many tribes had multiple medicine people who took care of the needs of their people, not just one person designated.
Correct. And what's interesting, so some of these provisions now have subsequently been interpreted by the Supreme Court to really, they're generally interpreted liberally. And that means that they take into account what the Native negotiators at the time understood the agreement to mean. So it wasn't just specifically, the provision of one, quote unquote, competent physician for all of these people. It was actually, meant healthcare. So as we're seeing now, particularly, I think, led by Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, they are interpreting it more based on those sorts of things that people understood at the time, and actually, supported by what's called the reserved rights doctrine, that these treaties should be interpreted, to mean more than the specifics of these, very narrow provisions. So in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, it was like what's called a judgment that doesn't really call for any kind of monetary awards for the tribe, but it's a declaratory judgment. So it just affirms, this healthcare as a treaty right. And for instance, it wouldn't have the authority to, to make Congress allocate more money for the Indian Health Service, but it does affirm this, treaty right of expectation of health care for the signatories of the Fort Laramie tribe, in addition to the Rosebud Sioux tribe.
So, having said that, what happens to the hospital that, the case, that brought the whole thing to the trial?
Yeah, well, it's not, they, have not, I think, received any kind of monetary judgment. And I don't know if they were looking for that. I think, they've begun, it's like quite an elaborate process. They've begun, by first affirming healthcare as a treaty right. So they have done this. It has been supported by the Eighth Circuit, and so now, of course, the federal government can appeal. And I did reach out to the Department of Justice, and they said they are "quote unquote" reviewing, whether they're going to appeal it or not. I actually spoke to Tim Purdon. He and Brendan Johnson, whose names you may recognize, they're former U.S. state's attorneys. Who are now in private practice. They're partners with the Robbins Kaplan law firm, and they took this case on pro bono. They were surprised that the Biden administration chose to move forward with this appeal, given President Joe Biden's expressed support for tribal sovereignty and for recognizing treaty rights. So as I said, they were rather disappointed, and so their great hope is that the federal government won't appeal this.
You can read Marinette's story on our website, and you look for the headline, Federal Court Affirms Healthcare as a Treaty Right. Marinette Pember, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Patty.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Tawahungva. Join us again tomorrow.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.